From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Oh, my goodness, we have an incredible show today. Tuesday night, Texas, the voters, Texas sent a message to the swamp in Washington, D.C., to the rhinos, to the left, to the moderates trying to destroy our state and our country. And we said, no more. We're going to break down every single bit of it today, or at least as much as we can get through. We're also on that, of course, we've got a U.S. Senate race, probably the biggest ticket in town, headed to a runoff. The Grassroots are fired up. We've got incredible events. We had a somewhat legendary congressman sent packing by double digits. We got a race that I think will, in part, define the soul of the Texas Republican Party for the next decade. And that's just getting us started. So, look, we got to give some time to the conflict in Iran. We can't ignore the world stage. President Trump, he's now struck Iran, not once, not twice, but now it's becoming daily. Look, these are the folks who have been chanting death to America for 41 plus years. It is starkly in my mind in 1979 when they stormed our embassy and they kept all of our American hostages for in excess of a year and traipsed them around. They've been some of the worst actors on the world stage and the most anti-American and the anti-liberty and freedom nation state of terrorists for the last 4 decades. So grab your coffee, God bless Texas, and let's get to work. This is Politics with the Big Dogs, and we have so much action today. We just have a great show, folks.
Thanks, Anthony. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. We'll keep you informed on new episodes, new guests, and new opportunities for your voice to be heard across Texas. Learn more and sign up today at politicswiththebigdogs.com.
All right, folks, if you're tuning in a couple minutes late, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Make sure you go to our website, politicswiththebigdogs.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Get engaged. We need you. We're going to talk with one voice, and we're going to help advance conservative values in Texas. We're doing and of course, we're on all the social medias, Politics with the Big Dogs on YouTube. We're on all of the, it's also converted into an app, all of the iTunes and otherwise. So listen to the show, 25 plus shows in that reservoir. We've had all of them. Ken Paxton, Don Buckingham, Don Huffines, who we'll talk about later today. I think I said Dawn Buckingham, of course, and I had Don Huffines in my mind as the next. We heard from Christy Craddock. We've had Briscoe Kane, Mitch Little, just incredible conservative leaders and thought leaders. Edward Bloom, who's challenged successfully all of the race-based mandates across America, particularly in higher ed, for the last 25 years or so. Just fascinating people. So there's a strong library in all of the podcasts. So go there. All right, let's get to it. And we've got to lead with probably the biggest race of the last many, many years. The race for U.S. Senate. So all of you, I'm sure, are aware, John Cornyn, the incumbent U.S. Senator, 24 years in the U.S. Senate, and he was challenged. He was challenged in the primary. I think, as I recall, it's the first time he's ever been challenged in the Republican primary since he was elected. He was challenged by Attorney General Ken Paxton, and he was challenged by Wesley Hunt. I believe Wesley is a second-term congressman out of Houston, and he served in the armed forces, and certainly we owe him honor and respect. So none of the three got over 50, right? None of the three got over 50%. So under Texas law, we're headed to a runoff. That date is May 26th, and it's Cornyn versus Paxton, round 2. So Paxton, of course, has been involved in plenty of runoffs and successfully has won, obviously, because he's elected and remains elected, but not just one. He usually dominates those. So it is. The vast majority of the people who show up in these runoffs are much more conservative than the Republican primary voter, and they favor conservative candidates. So Paxton has consistently won those. What's stunning to me, well, there's 3 or 4 things that are really striking about this race, and I'm sure you all have had some of these observations as well. So first and foremost, Senator Cornyn and his allies, really the D.C. swamp, is who I'm going to define as allies, because it's shit. We had Ken Paxton on the show, and he said something that I struggled with for a little while. And I think many of our listeners have as well. Some of you have contacted the show. So here's the deal: to run for a federal office, if you're not already in that office, you're not already a House member or senator, you have a lid on what you can raise from other individual donors. I think it's like $5,000 per couple or something, or 5,200. Paxton said it at the time, but if you're an incumbent, so if you're already a sitting U.S. senator or sitting U.S. House member, you get to participate in these committees, right? Like the Senate National Republican Senatorial Committee, and those donors can do hundreds of thousands. So that is how it is legal for an incumbent like John Cornyn to raise and spend $75 million against Ken Paxton primarily over the last 7 months. And that's what happened here, right? There's this incredible disparagement I'm stumbling through this, but the deck is just so stacked for the incumbent. I didn't understand that, and it didn't click in my mind until this race occurred. So Cornyn and team spent about $75 million over the last 6-7 months just tearing down Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton, best I can tell, spent about $5 million over the last 6 months defending himself and or pointing out Cornyn's flaws and or Wesley Hunt's. And Wesley Hunt's and his crew, and I'm defining his crew as being outside independent PACs, spent about $9 million that I have been aware of. So what strikes me is, Team Cornyn, 75 million plus, and if you throw in those outside PACs, it's much more than that. Paxton, 5-ish million, and let's round Wesley Hunt's up to about 10 million. So all of this money is flowing. It's overwhelmingly multiples of pro Cornyn money. Yet our incumbent senator had 60% of the primary electorate reject him, and John Cornyn got 41%. 41.8%, 0.7%, something like that. And Ken Paxton got 40% or 40.8, basically a 1-point delta. And Congressman Wesley Hunt got about 13.5%. But what strikes me is, wait a second. John Cornyn has been elected U.S. Senator 4 times already, 6-year terms, 24 years. So all the same people who voted in the primary have elected him 4 times as a U.S. Senator. And of course, he's seeking his 5th. It'll be 30 years in the U.S. Senate. And prior to that, he was Attorney General. He had been elected at least once, but I think twice. There might have been a special. I'm kind of going from memory. K. Bailey Hutchison exited at some point. But nonetheless, John Cornyn had been Attorney General, and frankly, in the Texas Supreme Court as well. So statewide ballot, many, many times, all these Republicans obviously had voted for him. He wouldn't have won. Yet 60% of the Republican primary electorate said no more. I'm a guy, as you all know, who used to run candidate campaigns and issue campaigns. And if you get 60% rejecting you, that's powerful. That's incredible. That's a real problem for a runoff. Now, Wesley Hunt, 13% of the people voted for him, 13.5, call it 14 even. How many are going to go for Cornyn? Unknown. Maybe they just said, I really like Wesley and Cornyn is my second choice, but I think the vast majority of them will be a rejection of Cornyn vote, just straight up. I believe very strongly that the runoff favors Ken Paxton, but we'll see. And as all of you and I have been watching the last couple of days, President Trump has come out and said, hey, I'm going to endorse one of you and the other one needs to drop out because we can't spend all this money. I really struggled to see him endorsing Cornyn, but the D.C. swamp is saying he's going to endorse Senator Cornyn. I had to pre-tape this show, so perhaps he will have endorsed by the time it airs. But it gives me great pause. An endorsement by the president is obviously very strong, but I'm not sure it's going to be enough. I think at least it's a coin flip, even if Cornyn gets President Trump's endorsement, because the electorate who is going to show up on May 26th are much more conservative. They're the people, all these Rhino Country Club types are already gone on vacation. They don't tend to show up in runoffs. It's the policy-minded, strong conservatives. So the biggest race on the banner, it's fascinating. And if Trump, for sure, Cornyn's going to go spend another 25 or 30 million. But, if Paxton has 5 or 10 million to point out the hits on Cornyn over the last 24 plus years, which clearly much of the base knows, or 60% would not have opposed him. I suspect it's Paxton. But we'll see. I've been wrong before, and shoot, I was wrong on Tuesday. I didn't expect Sid Miller to be upset. Right, here's a statewide guy that Trump endorsed. He did endorse late, but he lost. He lost in 8 sheets. He lost handedly. So we've got to get through all of this, and I'm spending a lot of time on the big meat because it's so fascinating and so much has happened the last few days here on this Paxton, Cornyn, Wesley Hunt. Wesley came out. I was about to endorse Paxton. What's going on? And trying to figure out what Trump wants and can pull off. So again, the electorate that'll turn out in the runoff is much smaller, much more conservative. That's Paxton's world. The runoff will be hardcore primary voters. That's pretty much Paxton's base. Now, is a Trump endorsement, if it comes, going to be enough? My gut is no, but I don't think we know, and it's going to be a fascinating ride between now and then to see and to listen and watch. It's not lost on any of us. You spend $70 million and you're still rejected by 60% of the primary voters. That's just a powerful nugget. So after 24 years in D.C., a strong majority of the electorate, the primary electorate, rejected John Cornyn. So Paxton addressed his supporters in Dallas. He was defiant. He took a shot directly at Republican establishment in Washington, at the Senate leadership money that poured into the prop up Cornyn effort. He said, we're not going to go quietly. We're not going to let you buy the seat. I think those were his exact words. The crowd went crazy. So, let's be honest, patriots. The numbers tell the story of just how much money was dumped in the race. All in, it's being reported like $120 million in ad spending. $120 million. Most expensive Senate primary in the history of the Republic, the entire United States. As I said, 70 plus on Cornyn alone, much of it from John Thune, the majority leader in the establishment wing of D.C. So he spent all that money, Cornyn and Team Cornyn just couldn't close the deal, and he's going to a runoff. That tells us an awful lot about the direction of the Republican base in Texas. So again, in round one, President Trump stayed out of the race. He said, I like all 3 candidates. Calls them all friends. And the results come in, and Trump posts on Truth Social that he's going to make an endorsement soon. He reminded everyone that his endorsements are, quote, virtually insurmountable. I'm a little suspicious of that declaration in Texas. Look, they're really strong. There's no question about that. Trump is a very strong leader and a strong endorsement. But something happened that I think was a strategic mistake by Team Trump. And that is this. About a year ago, when school choice was up in the Texas House, Trump had a call with, as I understand it, the entire Republican caucus, or most of them, and the governor, and they were on a speakerphone. He said, look, you passed this, and I endorse you all. Everybody who votes for it, I endorse you all. So what's that mean? And every Republican senator, 86 of the 88 Texas House Republicans voted for it, and they all got his endorsement, and they all sent mailers and ran TV commercials and all these ads. I'm endorsed by Trump. I'm endorsed by Trump. And 20 of the Republican senators, I'm endorsed by Trump. I'm endorsed. Well, it just eroded the value of that in my mind. And here's why. Because many of us in the conservative movement have been fighting, in particular, a lot of those rhinos in the Texas House. And we know they're not conservative, yet Trump endorsed them anyway, number one. And number two, we just saw these endorsed by Trump so often by so many, more than 100 people outside of his congressional endorsements, that the brand value, I think, eroded. And I'm surprised by that because traditionally, historically, Trump has been really protective of his brand. I mean, look what happened in that special election for Kelly Hancock's seat in Terrence County. Wambasson, the Republican candidate, and endorsed by Trump, and she lost in that special. And that's a district that is strongly Republican. Of course, she'll win in the primary, or won the primary, and will win in November, but lost in that special. So I'm a little bit suspect of just how powerful that is. Sid Miller's another example. And I was flat wrong in that race. I thought Sid Miller was going to take it whether Trump endorsed or not. And he lost, shockingly, lost by a solid margin. And then, of course, the Hancock seat, Kelly Hancock was appointed to comptroller. So he's the acting comptroller and vacated his seat in Tarrant County. And he was running in the Republican primary with Christy Craddock and Don Huffines, all three of whom have been interviewed on this show about the race and their effort to win comptroller. Don Huffines won over 50% on Tuesday, so he's in. He's the Republican nominee, and I'm certain he's going to be the next comptroller of Texas. So back to this special election to fill Kelly's seat. Trump, when she lost, Trump ended up in the media saying, I don't know that lady. I never endorsed her twice. He said that. Well, guess what? Twice he endorsed her. I just think they're kind of handing out the Trump endorsement like hot waffles and sending it to a bunch of rhinos who we in the grassroots know are not MAGA people, are not Trump people, are not aligned philosophically with us. And I believe it eroded his brand. It gives me great pause for him. So if you're just joining us, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Go to politicswithbigdogs.com. Follow us on social media. All the podcasts are loaded. There's 25 plus podcasts of fascinating people. We've already talked about Paxton. We've Don Buckingham, Christy Craddock, Don Huffines, all three, Kelly Hancock, all of the candidates for comptroller have been on. Half the statewide elected Republicans have been on, at least excluding the judges. They tend to be a little less interesting anyway. And many conservative state reps, Mitch Little. Next week, we're going to have Shelley Luther. Briscoe Cain, a candidate for Congress, was on many months ago. So there's a wonderful library of podcasts out there about conservatism and issues happening in Texas, and particularly the legislative focus. So go enjoy them, learn more, follow us, join us. Let's fight with one voice. So let's continue. We had such a big night. We're spending a lot of time here on the Senate race, but it merits it, right? Particularly if Trump gets more involved than he already has. Can he deliver a fifth term to Senator Cornyn? We're going to find out. One thing is not lost on me. Senator Ted Cruz is like, I'm going to stay neutral. I'm going to leave it to the voters. Like, smart move, Hoss. Smart move. He's got his own future to think about. So bottom line on that Senate runoff, the grassroots energy is real. Paxton's coalition's fired up. The D.C. swamp and its money and the moderates in Texas who fund against many of the conservatives are also fired up. They're going to pour tens of millions more money into it, try to bury the MAGA movement, at least the MAGA movement represented by Ken Paxton, and maybe they'll be successful. My gut is no, but maybe they'll be successful. All right, guys, we've got to turn to some of these other races. We only have so much time. Let's hit some of these congressionals. The most shocking to me, Dan Crenshaw, done. This guy was a hero just, 2 years ago, and certainly served our nation and deserves the honor and respect and served our nation in Congress. But the tides shifted in that congressional district, and Steve Toth, who is a very conservative, was a state house member for a long time, strong conservative, a strong man of faith. He beat Dan Crenshaw in the primary, and not by a little, but a lot. At one point, I think it was 18 points. So that's not a squeaker, that's a statement. Crenshaw, this Navy SEAL who lost an eye in combat in Afghanistan, he wears the patch. He's been in Congress, I think, since 2018. And I thought he was fast-tracked. In fact, he was. Let's call it what it is. He was fast-tracked to be a national figure in the Republican movement. He lost the Republican base. Well, I'm sorry. He lost the MAGA base is my takeaway. That I'm just struck by how quickly it shifted and how Steve Toth was able to run to his right. Steve is incredibly conservative. Ended up with a backing, as I recall, the House Freedom Caucus, and Senator Cruz came in late. Wow, what a takedown. We just don't have Republican incumbents go down in primaries very often. There's something like a 97% reelection rate in primaries. So when you get a guy who was on a rocket ship, basically, like Crenshaw was, to national MAGA prominence, be taken out, you got to stop and say, what's the lesson in this? One of them has to be that the Republican primary voters in Texas, you can be a war hero, you can raise millions of dollars, you can have national name recognition, but if you're seen as insufficiently loyal to Trump or the MAGA agenda or restoring power to the people, if you're seen as part of that establishment mob, then voters are going to send you home. The base is watching. We are watching, the listeners of this show, and we remember. And frankly, I think that's why John Cornyn's really going to struggle in the runoff. More and more I think about it, I'm suspicious. I think Paxton probably wins. Unless they're able to just shut down all of his money, I think he's going to win. But we'll see. We've got to move on to some of these other ones. We got a guy who, I'm just going to say it, I think is a scumbag. We have Tony Gonzales, who is a Republican congressman from South Texas. What is that? Congressional District 23. He ended up in a runoff, but with Brandon Herrera. And here's why I'm denouncing Tony Gonzales so aggressively. Tony Gonzales had an affair with his staffer and sent a whole bunch of inappropriate texts, and they were both married at the time. They both made bad decisions, and they clearly had a long-running affair. Obviously, that's totally unethical, and I'm not supportive of it in the slightest. With that disclaimer, I've got to recognize that it's just very common. It's very common, unfortunately, in America and in politics and with our elected leaders, D's and R's. It is what it is. I'm more critical of Gonzales for something else, and that is this. This poor staffer clearly got depressed, committed suicide, and ended up doing it by setting herself on fire, covering herself with gasoline and setting herself on fire. And I've talked about Tony on the show before. Then it started trickling out that it appears the two of them had an affair, and that might be a basis of part of her depression. And Tony Gonzales pulled a Bill Clinton. He looked squarely at the camera and said, "That is untrue. This is not true. It's a lie. I did not have a sexual relationship with this woman." Many, many times. And then more evidence came out, and more evidence came out. And then somebody had text messages. "Look, she sent me this note saying, I've had an affair with our boss, and it's really troubling." And he said, "No, that's not true. It was all made up." The poor gal must have been depressed. And more and more and more. And then the husband, or now the widow of the woman with whom Gonzales had an affair, said, "Well, look at all these text messages." And it was clear as day. Now Tony Gonzales has come out and said, "Yeah, I used bad judgment, and I take responsibility for it, and I had an affair." And he did use bad judgment, and he should take responsibility for it, and he should be judged by God and his family and the voters for the affair. But I'm judging him about something else. That is the lack of complete character that allows one to look at a camera and lie. Just bald-faced lie in your effort to get reelected. I'm incredibly troubled by that. I'm troubled by the totality of the events. But the individual who will look at a camera and absolutely lie in hopes of being reelected when they know what they're saying is a lie, that's disqualifying to me, period. Clinton did it with Monica Lewinsky, and he abused his power. He's the president, and she was an intern, but I was fundamentally wrong. But then he went and looked at not just America, but the world, and said, "That little girl's a liar. This didn't happen." And he was proved to have been lying. The same thing happened with Tony Gonzales. And for me, that fully disqualifies you. I can forgive somebody who takes responsibility for bad decisions. I may not reelect them, but I can forgive them. I think we have a duty to try to forgive. But I will not forgive someone who will walk out in front of the television cameras and lie and know they're lying in hopes that they don't get caught. That is a disqualifying event, or at least I won't forgive them as a candidate or an elected official. So Tony Gonzales has just got to go in my mind. He needs to resign. And the fact that the D.C. swamp stuck with him until he ended up in a runoff is really troubling to me. We just have so many problems in Washington, D.C. These guys are out of control. All right, we've got to move forward to some of these other races. There's a whole bunch of action. There's so much happened in the state level, too. It's fascinating. And before we get to the AG race and these other statewide, look, we've got to at least do a wave. Tallarico is the Democratic nominee, and there's all this buzz around. Yes, I get it. It's another Beto 2.0 style buzz. But what nobody has heard about Tallarico are the things that I remember, and some of our astute listeners will remember as well. And it's things like this. Tallarico is on camera saying, God has no gender. God is binary, and transgender children also need the right to abortion. I mean, just stunning things that are so out of step with Texans, not just Republicans, but even mainstream Texans. This is everybody can use the same bathroom. Children are binary, non-gendered entities, and abortion should be legal all turns, late term and otherwise. I mean, this guy, he's really a radical leftist, and $2 or $3 million of broadcasting his own words on television in Texas is going to doom his race. He is out there. And Beto was a radical guy, but he doesn't have the vote history of Tallarico. Tallarico is talking a reasonably good game, but I think he's going to get left behind in smoke. So I didn't want to fail to at least do away with that. All right, Nix, let's hit the Attorney General's race. Oh, my goodness. 4-way race, just incredible. And this, as we know from Ken Paxton, right, is just a critical race for conservatives, for lovers of liberty, because you can do so much with the Attorney General's office if you're a Texas AG. Abbott did a lot when he was an AG, but Ken Paxton took it to a whole nother level. And of course, if any of us remember Cornyn as AG, it was a very different comparison. But here we are. So we have State Senators Mays Middleton, who's a younger, very strong, policy-minded conservative, but a little bit quieter in his presentation. We had Congressman Chip Roy, who also is a policy-minded but loud, aggressive advocate, has had lots of well-known battles with President Trump. President Trump has called him all sorts of names. Chip Roy was, I think, the first one to call on Ken Paxton to resign. Those two made it into a runoff, but everybody expected Chip Roy to lead, and frankly, to lead by a reasonable margin, with Mays to come in second, and then quite a big gap between Mays and the other two. Well, nobody hit 50% in this 4-way race. Aaron Wrights and Joan Huffman. Joan Huffman is a sitting state senator from the Houston area, and Aaron Wrights had worked for Attorney General Paxton, had worked as Chief of Staff to Cruz, and had been in the Trump DOJ. Neither Senator Huffman nor Aaron Wrights made the runoff. I think each had approximately 15% of the statewide vote. This was a really strong field, and State Senator Mays Middleton and Congressman Chip Roy advanced to the runoff. So this is a fascinating matchup. Both credentialed conservatives, one with a history of attacking Trump and Paxton and others, and while also holding out in Congress and trying to make, the swamp do some things. So, we'll see what happens there. Chip Roy has national name recognition and a reputation as one of the more uncompromising people in the House, both on conservative issues and otherwise. He stood with Lynn Cheney, for example. That was a bold, strong move. I didn't agree with it, but I'll recognize it for the boldness that it took. And Mays Middleton, though more of a quieter person by nature, has certainly been engaged in the deep conservative values and thought at TPPF, the Texas Public Policy Foundation. You guys will remember we've had some of their folks on, and Mays is independently wealthy, so he's been able to put in quite a bit of his own money. Chip Roy has a lot of national D.C. relationships. A lot of those folks came in as independent expenditures for him. We're going to see what happens. I was struck by the vote count, right? I really thought Mays would come in second. I thought Chip Roy would get 38 to 42, and Mays would come in around 28 to 32, and we'd see where the other two came down. Well, that was just wrong. Mays Middleton performed. He hit almost 40%. No, well, he hit 39.1. Let me say that. So, but really strong, and he was 8 points ahead of Chip Roy, or 7.5. Chip got 31.6 as I see the data. Joan Huffman at 15.1 and Aaron Wrights at 14.2. Look, 14% is not a great showing, but I gotta say, Aaron Wrights had never been elected to anything before, and he had never done fundraising, as I understand it. That's pretty strong. You get 300,000 votes statewide. It's pretty strong. Joan Huffman, she's been a state senator for quite a while, but still, she got 311,000 votes in a very competitive primary that had a ton of money spent. I think Mays Middleton spent 11 or 12 million. I bet Chip Roy spent 9, maybe even to 12 range when you count everybody all in. So those two go to a runoff, and Mays had an 8-point lead in the first round. Wow. I got that one wrong. I thought those two would make the runoff together, but would be flipped. If you had a different opinion, you see something I'm missing, please let us know. Call, write, join us. Okay, comptroller's race. We had 3 primary candidates, Don Huffines, Kelly Hancock, and Christy Craddock. Christy Craddock has been on the show. She's I believe, a second-term railroad commissioner, so she's been elected statewide. Her dad has been a 50-year institution in the Texas House, former Speaker of the House, Speaker Craddock from Midland. They're oil and gas people, multi-generational. She got 15%. Kelly Hancock, who we spoke about earlier, the state senator from Tarrant County, vacated the seat because Abbott appointed him comptroller or acting comptroller, got 23%, a little closer to almost 24%. And what's significant about this is Abbott had basically done a tour around the state with Kelly Hancock and with Nate Sheets, but Abbott spent, I believe, $5 million of his own campaign money supporting Hancock. And Don Huffines got over 57%. He got 57. Kelly Hancock got just under 24. Craddock at 15, and some smaller folks got 3-4%. But wow, Huffines ran away with it. I also believed I got this one wrong. I thought Huffines would get close to 50, probably not break it. He'd end up in a runoff, and he and Paxton would both be in runoffs. And Huffines is a very strong conservative, very well liked and appreciated by the grassroots, and I thought those two would be in tandem in a runoff. So that does a little bit change the dynamic in terms of the Senate runoff, and I want to flag those for all of us. And then the last, and the one that I just got flat wrong, Nate Sheets, who I hear a lot of good things about. I've not met him. Collin County guy. He too was endorsed by Abbott. I don't know that Abbott spent money or donated to him in a material way, but he and Kelly Hancock and Abbott toured the state, did lots of media together against Sid Miller. And Sid Miller is a guy who's been ag commissioner forever and a day and has been challenged and just consistently wins. He also has historically never been able to raise money for some reason. But Sheets beat him. Sheets spent a lot of money, is my understanding, and beat him 52-47. And okay, that just is what it is. I'm shocked and surprised, but that's how it went down. Now, we've got to move to these legislative races because those are some of the most interesting. Coming right at you. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Please go to politicswiththebigdogs.com, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media. We're on all of the podcast hosts. There's 25 plus episodes and lots of interesting commentary and thoughts and debates. And go listen. We appreciate you. Coming at you right now with Texas Legislative.
More with Anthony Holm coming up in just a minute. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. While you're there, make sure you listen to our previous episodes of Politics with the Big Dogs. Politics with the Big Dogs is brought to you by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Got a question for Anthony Holm? Email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Now, more with Anthony Holm on Politics with the Big Dogs.
All right, folks. We've got to get on these legislative races. I spent a good bit of time on the Tony Gonzales, a U.S. House member, Republican, who's now admitted to the affair. Here's what I failed to say was, this was disclosed and came to light initially many months ago by Tony Ortiz, who's an online news investigative reporter. Some might call him a gadfly. I think his group, Current Revolt, has transitioned from more of a gossip rag to a substantive online. I don't mean that pejoratively. It's just Tony Ortiz is one of the people I follow, and I flagged that for you all. And he uncovered the truth about Tony Gonzales 6, 7, 8 months ago. It broke into the mainstream, I think, in the Express News and elsewhere in the last less than 2 weeks. But Tony was there a long time ago. He's also the guy that exposed. What's the state rep who was having that long time affair in the Metroplex? Geo. He exposed Geo for having this sordid situation with an exotic dancer as Geo was running um, as a Christian conservative and a man of faith and denied it initially, and that too was exposed. So I've got to give a real big hat tip to Tony Ortiz. Other people are out there, much like the Minneapolis and the Minnesota corruption. It was one or two people like a Tony Ortiz who are paying attention and show up with a video camera and ask the right question and expose billion-dollar fraud. Now Ortiz in Texas has exposed Geo, who exited stage left for having a long-term affair, even though he's on the floor of the Texas legislature pretending to be something he's not. And now he exposed Tony Gonzales. So we got to keep these folks up and running. Visit Current Revolt and pay attention. I follow this guy daily, and it's a wonderful news source. Okay, we got to get into these House races. Conservatives showed up. Movement, policy-oriented, focused people showed up. 60% of them rejected Senator Cornyn, and a big chunk by like double digits rejected Dan Crenshaw. That was almost shocking to me. And two powerful, longtime House state rep incumbents were also rejected. So Stan Kitzman, who if I'm memory serves, is a sitting chairman in the Texas legislature. He was one of the early people in support of Dustin Burrows. When I say early people, I mean that coalition of 20 or so who sided with the D's, and they had the extended battle for the speakership about a year and a half ago or so. He was an early getter. And the second one who lost was Cecil Bell in Montgomery County. Cecil's a longtime Republican who also lost, I think, by double digits, taken out by a constitutional conservative, a movement conservative. She's going to be excellent for the chamber. She's going to be excellent for our values. And I don't think Cecil was in there as early as Kitzman, but he was in there. So, look, I believe many of our opinions have changed because the policy outcomes of the Texas House were as conservative as they've been in is my recent memory. And I give great kudos to the House for coming through in so many conservative bills. They need to do better. They need to do more. They also propped up Democrats in a way that I think is inappropriate. They took them off chairmanships, so it gave them these coveted vice chairmanships and staffs and budgets and veto power over legislation and forcing things on the agenda that I think it's just a violation of the spirit and the mandate of the people, and they did it through the rules. It was pretty shady, but we're here, and we've had really good policy outcomes. The point is, 2 state reps, part of the entrenched establishment, went down in flames. So when you got a 97% incumbent retention rate and you got the U.S. senator rejected by 60%, you got Crenshaw rejected, you got 2 of, and by the way, Trump endorsed House reps who are, one's a chair, the other one might be a chair, but long-standing, deep relationships in the community, all in the greater Houston area. One is up there in Montgomery County, north of it, and then Kitzman, I believe, is to the west of Houston and over some of those like the Wharton area and those type of counties. So hardline rejected by strong conservatives, constitutional conservatives who will fight against power, and that's a real beautiful thing. Earlier on the program, or on a different program rather, I flagged for you all that Governor Abbott's made a lot of endorsements, but I believe 3 far and away stand above the others. And one is Kelly Hancock for controller. Kelly got taken out. Abbott put $4 or $5 million of his own money in it. They toured the state. Hancock got taken out by Don Huffines in round 1. He and Christy Craddock, neither of them could hold Huffines under 50. In fact, I think Huffines was pushing 60. So that's a real egg in the face loss. Here's the one that I got totally wrong, and I've already spoken to it. Sheets. Abbott took Sheets around. I don't know if he made donations out of his campaign, but certainly he said, this is my guy. We've got to beat incumbent Sid Miller. I was just flat wrong. I didn't think it would happen. Didn't really even believe there was hope. And Sheets won convincingly. And then, of course, on the first race of comptrollers, you all have heard me say in the past that I expected it to be a runoff with Hancock and Huffines. And if it wasn't, then that would be just disastrous in terms of Abbott's credibility and endorsement power. And then the third thing, and of course the second one was Sheets, which I think he overperformed. Got to give credit where credit's due. And then the third one is Abbott said Harris County will go Republican, period. It's going to vote for me. It's going to vote for Republicans in November. If I have to spend $100 million, that's how it's going to be. I think he is the least likely to get that one, but time will tell. And it is not lost on me as I think about that proclamation and from the Governor Abbott, that he also endorsed in a contested primary for the Republican candidate for county judge in Harris County. And there was a five-ish credible candidates in there. He chose a union leader, and the guy didn't make the runoff, right? So Abbott's endorsement power there was severely harmed, and it makes me wonder if he just does not have a good bead on Harris County, because I can't imagine it's going to go Republican in November. But hey, let's go try. We should be saying that we're going to try, and we should try, and we should spend $100 million. It's worth it. But declaring that it will go, it's different. So he set the bar that he just has to succeed, and I'm real suspect of it. So what is the power of endorsements, right? We talked about some of the Trump endorsements, Sid Miller, the two state reps who went down, some of the others. It's strong. I'm not sure it's going to overcome in this runoff. Paxton has come out and said 100% he is staying in no matter what, owes it to the voters. While we've been filming this show, he has said that. So, man, fine. This show, we had to tape it a little bit early this week, so we're taping it before Trump has made an endorsement. Everybody expects it to be Cornyn. I'm just not sure it's going to be enough. These down ballot races, movement conservatives are winning. They're overcoming the establishment. They're overcoming the D.C. swamp. D.C. spent so much money in that Senate race, and still 60% of conservatives rejected Cornyn. And the profile of the folks who show up at the end of May 26th, are so much more conservative. I just don't see it happening. So we've got to get to Iran, but there's another hugely significant anti-establishment effort that occurred, and an event that occurred on Tuesday. In the past, regular listeners, and if you're just tuning in, this is Anthony Holm with Politics with the Big Dogs. Make sure you go to politicswithbigdogs.com, sign up for our newsletter, help us fight for liberty, fight for conservative values in Texas. If we speak with one voice, we will win, period. Follow us on social media. We have dozens and dozens of podcasts on all of the major hosts, iTunes, you name it, it's there. Fascinating people. Don Buckingham, all the candidates for comptroller were interviewed separately. A number of attorney general, many movement conservatives and policy leaders over the last several months have been on the show. So tune in and listen. Now, what is significant? We recently had James Wesolek. Remember that fella of Rattler, RATLR.org, on the show. And this guy is a conservative thought leader and activist. He was with Heritage Foundation, with the state party of Texas. So he's one of us. He's enmeshed in it. And he launched a nonprofit educational and advocacy group called Rattler, and it stands for Republicans Against TLR. Well, many of us who have been fighting these battles for 30 years at the grassroots level have known TLR, a reasonably obscure PAC and lobby group in Austin. They're obscure because they aren't known broadly to Texans, but they're the most politically successful effort in the state of Texas over the last 20 years. They have a PAC with like $40 million in it, and they just dump millions and millions of dollars into liberal Democrats and rhinos and some conservatives, but a lot into rhinos and a good bit into liberal Democrats to ensure the status quo. And I suggest, as a guy who cares about policy outcomes, that they have been a real impediment to us. 30 years ago when they came to be, they were great. I helped them grow. Frankly, I supported one of their bills last session. I fervently opposed two other bills. It just is what it is. I'm gonna advance policy where it needs to be advanced. But they have changed, and one of the impediments. So they did their mission. They reformed the tort system, which was out of control in the 80s and 90s, and hallelujah that they did it. But they just stayed too long, kind of looked around, in my opinion, for things to do. So a bunch of conservatives got together and they started a group, Republicans Against TLR. Well, TLR last session had the worst session they've had in my memory. They were soundly defeated. Well, they because they try to pass bills that capped damages of Chinese polluters or Chinese companies that hurt you at $250,000 for pain and suffering. They tried to say, hey, if a child got sexually assaulted, yeah, she can sue for her injuries, her physical injuries, and will pay for the doctor bills. But if her mental harm and she's scarred for the rest of her life, you can't get more than $250,000, no matter what a jury does. If it's a illegal immigrant that grabs a 12-year-old and drags her under the bridge and beats her and assaults her, then that limit is $250,000. Period. Well, that's just fundamentally wrong, right? So, and shockingly, a bunch of ours in the Senate tried to help pass it. They're like, well, we have to. It's TLR. We don't have a choice. But the House killed it. A bunch of constitutional conservatives got together and said it's flawed policy and killed it. So anyway, these guys came out and said, well, we're going to beat you all. We have this massive war chest. We know how to do it. You're gone. And they went and they recruited against strong conservatives like Hopper, right, in Denton County, who we all fought so hard to get into the House 3 years ago, last cycle. Or Mark DeRazio, who had been, this is the guy who was Bear County party chair when they censured Strauss. I mean, he's just a religious conservative, top to bottom, super strong conservative. Well, they went and recruited candidates against that profile of person, Olcott up in the Metroplex, really strong conservatives, and put a bunch of money, millions of dollars behind them. They got wiped out. TLR got wiped out, guys. This talk about a rejection of the establishment and the DC swamp and the Austin swamp, just top to bottom. DeRazio won, I think 75-25, even though they put close to $1 million behind his opponent, kind of a Bush old school country club Bush acolyte type. I think Carl Rove invested in that race, or donated, I guess is a better way to say it, to the opponent, and lost 75-25. Andy Hopper up in Denton County crushed his opponent. I think it was 73, 28, something like that. And Mark LaHood, who they spent $2-ish millions going against also in Bear County. This guy's a real conservative. There's no way around it. He might have been a Democrat way back when, or voted at least as a Democrat at times way back when, but he's a strong conservative, period. And he showed that he'd stand on policy and risk his position in the legislature. They spent, I think, $2.5-ish million against him, and he drummed the guy by 20-ish points also. I mean, it was just a beatdown. And then there was this open race where a strong conservative was running, and TLR was afraid of him. This was up in the it might have been Tarrant County area, but it's up in that southwest Metroplex area. They spent $3 million trying to keep that guy out. Super conservative, one of the first to lead against Sharia law a couple of years ago, before people were really paying attention to it. He beat him by 5 also. So the establishment just got fundamentally rejected, and this is the Austin swamp, right? The biggest pot of money, just a full beatdown. So this Rattler guy that we had on recently, might even have been just last week, James Wesolek, at ratlr.org. If he was involved in any of these, then man, he just won out of the box. What I think is happening as much as anything is that conservatives are recognizing how it really works in Washington, D.C., and how it really works in Austin, and who the bad actors are. And they're going, oh, Senate Leadership Fund and Thune, if you're trying to get Cornyn, no, and you're putting $75 million in it, we're going to reject you 60-40. And TLR, this group that we hadn't really understood why we couldn't get tax reform or school choice earlier, or banning taxpayer-funded lobbying. Oh, well, you're propping up all these Ds and rhinos who can vote against it with millions of dollars. Well, then we're going to find out where you are and reject those people too. That happened. Like, holy smokes. Austin, the 8, 10, 12,000 people who all work in the Capitol, live around the Capitol, all these quote-unquote insiders are floored. They're just abuzz by it. I was contacted by a reporter from the Express News and the Austin Pacer, and I went ahead and gave her a quote. She's like, Anthony, what do you think's happened? I said, well, it's shocking. For the last 15 or so years, the leadership of the Texas House, and to a lesser extent the Senate, they had to bend the knee to these guys at TLR. He had to bend the knee. What do you want? We want this bill, even if it's bad policy, you're going to go pass it. Yes, we will. And 50 or 60 R's line up without even reading the bill and say, we're on. And for the first time, they were defeated. They were defeated last session. One of the bills, by the way, Trump came out and denounced a major tenet of it in the middle of session. This is poor Jeff Leach, who had to carry it for TLR, right? Because they've given him a couple $1 million. He's like, yes, I'll carry it. Well, that bill said, if you're a foreign truck driver driving on a foreign CDL in the state of Texas, you can't speak English, you can't read English, we're going to change the law to protect you. The jury is not going to learn any of this. Current law says they automatically learn. And we're going to avoid that out in almost all circumstances. So in the middle of all this, Trump came out and said, man, this is a national crisis. We got a safety event. All these foreign truck drivers who don't speak English, who haven't been properly trained, we got to get them off the road. We got to enforce our regulations. You know, Abbott, he remained quiet during session. I don't think he wanted to oppose TLR. I don't think he wanted to oppose Leach. He came out somewhere in the summer, as I recall, and said, yeah, we got to do this. We got to get them off the road. They're just killing people left and right. But that's an example of the policy, right? Yet 50, 60 Republican House members just signed up. Many of them didn't believe it when I and others said, hey, you know what's in this bill? Oh, TLR wouldn't do that. But now they've been exposed, and the grassroots exposed them. And now they've been rejected handily at the ballot box, even though they had millions of dollars. So a massive shift is happening as of Tuesday. A 24-year incumbent in the U.S. Senate with all the money in the world, you know, he couldn't get there. He basically got a tie with a social conservative who has been plagued by the establishment all the way through, 41-40. 60% rejected the incumbent. Same thing happened with Kitzman. Same thing happened with Cecil Bell. Same Cheryl Bean, right? Conservatives moved and said, we're not going to take this from the swamp, be it D.C. or Austin. Now, it's a major, major event. So, all right, we've got to get into Iran. On February 28th, the United States, in conjunction with Israel, launched a massive military operation against Islamic Republic of Iran. We know it as Iran. Radical Muslims who have been the number one terrorist supporting group and Death to America chanters for 40 or 41 years. They called it Operation Epic Fury. And folks, this is not a small thing. It might be the most consequential foreign policy action of this generation. There's just no way around it, right? They stormed our embassy in 79. They held hostages for more than a year. We didn't light the Christmas tree on the Capitol grounds. I remember this all so clearly. I was young. They have been anti-American, burning flags, the Ayatollah Khomeini, death to America, infidels, supporting terrorists trying to kill us, period. The guy that chanted death to America for decades found death from America. This is the fella in the country that funded Hamas to Hezbollah to the Houthi. Everybody who's terrorized America. Let's remember, in June of last year, Operation Midnight Hammer, because the Iranians were going to get nukes, and I believe they'd use it. A lot of the folks in the MAGA world, prominent folks in the MAGA world, have reservations. And I understand nobody wants to get in a long, drawn-out war, and nobody wants to lose their children. I believe that Iran, North Korea, Russia, China, a handful of really bad actors have been plaguing not just America and our values, but the world and democracy and opportunity. And taking out somebody who's on the cusp of getting nuclear weapons, number one, and number two, has a proven history of taking American life and bloodshed, just like Osama bin Laden, that's the right move. I think it's in the interest of America, in the here and now, the interest of our children and our grandchildren, to wipe them clean as needed. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your conservative activism. God bless you, and God bless the state of Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Learn more about today's guest and hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.